Imagine standing in the middle of a vast, silent city, once bustling with life, now swallowed by time. The streets, once filled with the laughter of children and the chatter of merchants, lie empty. The temples, built to honor gods whose names we've forgotten, crumble under the weight of centuries, and the people, gone, not a single trace left behind to tell us why. This isn't the plot of a fantasy novel or some ancient legend. This is reality. Across our planet, entire civilizations have risen, thrived, and then vanished. No warning, no explanation, just silence. What could make a society that once dominated its world simply disappear? Was it war, disaster, or something far more mysterious? These aren't just academic questions, they're puzzles that tug at the deepest parts of our curiosity. Because when a civilization falls, it doesn't just take its people with it, it takes its secrets. And today, we're going to uncover 30 of the most baffling cases in human history. From the sunken ruins of Atlantis to the abandoned jungles of the Maya, from the desert-buried cities of the Indus Valley to the cliffside dwellings of the Anasazi, each story is a whisper from the past begging us to listen. But here's the thing, these aren't just tales of dust and decay. They're reminders of how fragile our own world might be. If empires with towering monuments and advanced knowledge could vanish without a trace, what does that say about us? That's the chilling, thrilling mystery we're diving into today. So settle in, because we're about to embark on a journey through time. One that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about history, survival, and the fleeting nature of human achievement. The Indus Valley civilization stands as one of history's most perplexing mysteries, an ancient society so advanced. Its achievements rivaled those of Egypt and Mesopotamia, yet its disappearance left barely a whisper behind. Flourishing around 2600 BC in what's now modern-day Pakistan and northwest India, this civilization built cities that would impress even modern urban planners. Take Mohenjo-Daro, for example. Its streets were laid out in perfect grids with baked brick buildings rising 2 stories high. But what truly astonishes archaeologists? The drainage systems. Each home had its own bathing area connected to a network of covered sewers that ran beneath the streets, a level of sanitation unmatched for thousands of years. And their public wells, strategically placed to serve entire neighborhoods, proving they thought about community health long before the concept existed elsewhere. Then there's the script, hundreds of symbols etched into seals and pottery, a writing system that remains undeciphered to this day. Some believe it recorded trade transactions, others think it held religious significance. But without a Rosetta Stone-like key, their words are lost to us, silencing an entire civilization's stories. So what happened to them? Theories abound. Some point to climate change. Evidence suggests the mighty Saraswati River, their lifeblood, may have dried up, turning fertile land into desert. Others argue invading tribes or internal collapse played a role. But here's the haunting truth. There's no layer of ash from war, no mass graves from plague, just empty streets and abandoned homes, as if one day everyone simply walked away. What makes the Indus Valley's disappearance so eerie is its sheer completeness. Unlike fallen empires that left ruins smoldering in their wake, this society faded so quietly, it took millennia for the modern world to realize they'd ever existed at all. And that's the real mystery. How did a civilization so sophisticated vanish without leaving us a single clue as to why? Now, let's sail across the Mediterranean to the island of Crete, where the Minoans built a civilization as vibrant as the frescoes that adorned their walls. Picture towering palace complexes with labyrinthine corridors, sophisticated plumbing systems, and stunning artwork depicting leaping athletes vaulting over charging bulls. This wasn't just another ancient society. The Minoans were Europe's first advanced civilization, flourishing centuries before classical Greece. At the heart of their world stood Knossos, a palace so grand it may have inspired the myth of the Minotaur's labyrinth. Its multi-story buildings boasted light wells for ventilation, intricate drainage systems, and storage rooms overflowing with olive oil, wine, and grain. The walls came alive with colorful frescoes, blue dolphins dancing across plaster, bare-chested athletes mid-somersault over bulls' horns, and processions of offering bearers in flounced skirts. This was a culture that celebrated movement, nature, and grace. Then there's their writing. While the Mycenaeans later adapted their script into Linear B, the original Minoan linear remains one of archaeology's great unsolved puzzles. Hundreds of clay tablets covered in these cryptic symbols sit in museum cases, holding secrets about trade deals, religious rituals, or perhaps even the last words of a vanishing people. Without the key to decode them, we're left guessing at the thoughts of scribes who wrote them over 3,000 years ago. So what caused their downfall? The theories read like a disaster movie script. Around 1600 BC, the volcanic island of thorough modern Santorini erupted with a force 10 times greater than Krakatoa. The explosion would have been heard across continents, sending tsunamis crashing into Crete's northern shores. Ash blotted out the sun for years, crippling agriculture. But here's the twist: Knossos survived this catastrophe, only to collapse a century later. That's led some scholars to point fingers at the rising Mycenaeans from mainland Greece, whose warrior culture left burn marks in Minoan palaces. Other evidence suggests internal unrest or economic collapse. The real haunting question: why did no one rebuild? Unlike other conquered civilizations, the Minoan way of life, their art, their writing, even their bull-leaping rituals simply stopped. It's as if the sea that once carried their trade ships to Egypt and Syria swallowed their memory whole, leaving behind only fragments of painted plaster and unanswered questions about how such brilliance could fade so completely. Deep in the steamy jungles of Mexico's Gulf Coast, a civilization emerged that would shape the course of Mesoamerican history, only to vanish like a shadow at noon. The Olmecs, often called the mother culture of the region, built their world around 1300 BC, centuries before the Maya raised their pyramids or the Aztecs founded Tenochtitlan. And what they left behind defies explanation. Colossal stone heads, each weighing up to 40 tons, their features so distinct they couldn't possibly be the work of primitive artisans. These massive sculptures, some standing over 9 feet tall, stare out from the past with flattened noses, thick lips, and helmets that suggest they might represent rulers or warriors. But here's the thing: the basalt used to carve them came from mountains over 50 miles away, transported without wheels or beasts of burden. How? That's just one of the riddles the Olmecs left us. Their craftsmanship extended beyond sculpture too. Intricate jade figurines, some depicting were jaguar hybrids, hint at a spiritual world where humans and beasts blurred together. And their ceremonial centers, like La Venta with its towering pyramid and hidden offerings of polished mirrors and serpentine tiles, reveal a society obsessed with ritual and cosmic order. Then there's their writing. While the Maya get credit for developing Mesoamerica's first full script, the Olmecs may have beaten them to it. A stone slab found near Veracruz, etched with 62 mysterious symbols, could be the earliest writing in the Americas if scholars could decode it. Without that key, we're left guessing whether these markings recorded royal decrees, astronomical events, or prayers to gods whose names we'll never know. So why did this influential culture collapse around 400 BC? The signs point to environmental catastrophe. Sediment cores from nearby lakes show drastic drops in rainfall, suggesting prolonged droughts that would have crippled their maize-based agriculture. At the site of San Lorenzo, archaeologists found defaced monuments, statues toppled and buried, as if in a final act of rebellion against the elites who failed to prevent the collapse. But other theories whisper of volcanic eruptions or shifts in trade routes that starved their cities of resources. The real intrigue: unlike later civilizations that left detailed chronicles of their falls, the Olmecs dissolved so completely that even their name is a modern invention taken from the Aztec word for rubber people, who had no memory of the civilization that preceded them by millennia. Their legacy lives on in the calendar systems, ball games, and gods adopted by later cultures, yet the people behind these innovations slipped away like smoke, leaving only stone giants to guard their secrets. High in the rose-red cliffs of southern Jordan, the Nabateans carved a kingdom from stone, a civilization whose genius for survival in the desert outshone even their breathtaking architecture. These master traders didn't just build Petra, they transformed it into a glittering crossroads of incense, spices, and silk, funneling wealth from Arabia to the Mediterranean. But their true brilliance lay beneath the surface. While rival empires struggled with droughts, the Nabateans turned water scarcity into an art form. Walk through Petra's winding Sick Canyon today, and you'll spot channels carved into the rock walls, part of an intricate system that captured every precious drop of rainwater. They built dams to divert flash floods into reservoirs, designed ceramic pipes with sediment traps to keep water clean, and even pressurized their aqueducts using gravity to supply multi-story buildings. In a land where temperatures could soar past 120 degrees, their gardens bloomed with figs and palms, irrigated by a network so advanced it put Rome's aqueducts to shame. Then there's the mystery of their script. The Nabatean alphabet evolved into modern Arabic, yet we've found no grand libraries or royal chronicles, just merchant ledgers and tomb inscriptions. Their voices reach us in fragments, like echoes bouncing off Petra's canyon walls. Even their most famous monument, the Treasury facade immortalized in Indiana Jones films, hides its original purpose behind centuries of speculation. Was it a temple, a royal tomb? The debate still simmers among archaeologists. So why did this ingenious culture fade after Rome annexed them in 106 CE? Some blame the empire's redirecting of trade routes away from Petra, starving the city of its lifeblood. Others point to earthquakes. The same tectonic forces that helped carve Petra's cliffs may have shattered its water systems beyond repair. But the most haunting clue comes from tree rings. Severe droughts in the 3rd century CE could have turned their hydraulic marvels into dry relics, the real tragedy. The Nabateans didn't so much disappear as dissolve. Roman influence diluted their identity, and later Arab dynasties absorbed their descendants. Today, Bedouins still guide tourists past the same stone facades their ancestors might have walked by, unaware that the people who built this wonder once whispered secrets to the desert winds, secrets we may never fully hear. The Mycenaeans ruled Greece in an era of gold-plated warriors and towering citadels, their influence stretching from the Aegean Sea to the shores of Egypt. Unlike the graceful Minoans who came before them, these were a people forged in war. Their cities, like Mycenae and Turin's, crouched behind cyclopean walls so massive later Greeks believed only mythical giants could have built them. Step inside their palaces and you'd find storerooms stacked with bronze weapons, frescoes of chariot battles, and clay tablets inscribed with Europe's oldest known writing, Linear B. Deciphering that script in the 1950s cracked open a window into their world. We learned of a society obsessed with inventory, lists of swords, chariots, even perfumed oil, all meticulously recorded by palace scribes. But here's the catch. These records reveal almost nothing about their beliefs, their poetry, or the names of their gods. It's like reading a grocery list from a long-dead culture and trying to reconstruct their religion. The only myth we can confidently tie to them, the Trojan War. Their artifacts show up at ancient Troy's destruction layer, hinting that Homer's epic might have roots in real Mycenaean conflicts. Then came the collapse. Around 1200 BC, fire consumed their palaces. The grand halls of Pylos and Thebes burned so violently the heat cracked stone. Some point to the mysterious sea peoples, marauders who ravaged empires across the Mediterranean. Others blame the Dorians, invading tribes from the north whose crude pottery replaced Mycenaean styles. But newer evidence suggests something more insidious: climate change. Tree rings from that era show a 300-year drought, a mega-drought that would have withered crops, sparked famines, and turned allies into enemies fighting over dwindling resources. What's unsettling is how thoroughly their world dissolved. The art of writing vanished for centuries. Their trade networks evaporated, leaving Greece in a dark age where even pottery skills regressed to primitive forms. By the time classical Athens rose, the Mycenaeans had faded into legend, remembered only as the heroes of Homer's epics. Their abandonment was so complete that when archaeologists first uncovered golden death masks at Mycenae, one whispered in awe, "I have gazed upon the face of Agamemnon." But the truth is far more haunting. We may never know whose faces those really were, or why their civilization crumbled into silence. In the dense jungles of Cambodia, a civilization once thrived with such grandeur that its temples still take our breath away, even as vines strangle their towers. The Khmer Empire didn't just build cities, they engineered an aquatic masterpiece. At its heart stood Angkor Wat, a temple so vast it could fit nearly 400 football fields within its moat. But what truly set the Khmer apart wasn't just their stone, it was their water. Picture a metropolis crisscrossed by canals, reservoirs the size of lakes, and rice fields fed by an intricate system of dikes and sluices. The Tonle Sap Lake, swelling and shrinking with monsoons, became their liquid lifeline. Engineers designed Barre's massive artificial lakes to store monsoon rains, while underground channels redistributed water with precision. This wasn't just irrigation, it was hydraulic wizardry that fed a population likely surpassing 1 million when London was still a muddy town, yet their genius may have seeded their downfall. Sediment cores reveal something chilling. The Khmer cut down too many trees to expand their rice paddies. Without roots to anchor the soil, their canals clogged with erosion. Then the monsoons faltered. Tree rings from Vietnam show brutal droughts in the 14th century, some lasting decades. The very reservoirs they built to conquer nature's whims became stagnant pools breeding malaria. Add to this the rising power of Ayutthaya, modern Thailand, whose armies sacked Angkor not once but twice. But here's the twist: the Khmer didn't vanish overnight. Instead, their capital crept south toward Phnom Penh, trading stone glory for survival in a changing world. Angkor didn't so much collapse as dissolve into the jungle, its aqueducts choked by roots, its temples whispering prayers in a forgotten tongue. The haunting lesson: even the most advanced societies can crumble when they outsmart, but don't outrespect their environment. The Khmer's hydraulic empire became its own tomb, buried not by invaders, but by the very landscape they sought to tame. Today, as tourists marvel at Angkor's reflection in its moat, they're gazing into a mirror of human ambition and its fragile dance with nature. Imagine an island so remote, its nearest neighbors live over 1,000 miles across open ocean, a speck of land where people not only survived but carved giants. The Rapa Nui didn't just inhabit Easter Island, they transformed it, lifting nearly 900 moai statues onto sacred platforms, some weighing as much as 80 tons. These towering figures, with their elongated noses and hollow eyes, gaze inland as if guarding secrets we'll never fully understand. How did a society with no metal tools quarry, transport, and erect these monoliths? The answer lies in their ingenuity. They carved the statues directly from volcanic rock at Rapa using basalt hand chisels. Then came the real feat, moving them. Contrary to wild theories about alien assistance, experiments prove the moai could have walked upright, rocked forward by teams with ropes, a backbreaking process that might explain the dozens of abandoned statues still littering ancient roads. But the island's true tragedy isn't in how these colossus rose, it's why they fell. By the time Europeans arrived in 1722, many moai had been toppled, and the island's lush palm forests had vanished. For decades, scholars pointed to ecocide, blaming the Rapa Nui for recklessly deforesting their own home to move statues. triggering soil erosion and collapse. Yet newer evidence complicates this story. Pollen studies suggest rats, stowaways on Polynesian canoes, devoured tree seeds faster than they could regrow. And when Dutch explorers landed, they described not a starving society, but one with well-tended gardens, hinting that the Rapa Nui adapted to their changing landscape long before outsiders arrived. Then there's Rongorongo, the island's cryptic script carved onto wooden tablets. Unlike other Polynesian cultures, the Rapa Nui developed what appears to be writing, but colonizers and missionaries burned most tablets, dismissing them as pagan relics. The few surviving fragments taunt linguists with glyphs resembling plants, animals, and ritual figures, arranged in alternating lines. Was it genealogy? Astronomy without a key, we're left staring at symbols as inscrutable as the Moe's stony expressions. The final blow likely came from slavers. Peruvian raids in the 1860s kidnapped half the population, including elders who held oral histories. By the time survivors returned, bringing smallpox, the island's social fabric had unraveled. Today, the Moe stand re-erected by archaeologists, but the people who raised them left no manuals, only whispers in a script we can't read, and a warning about how isolation, ambition, and outside violence can conspire to silence even the most resilient cultures. 5,000 years before the first pyramids rose in Egypt, a civilization in Eastern Europe was building settlements so vast they could rival modern towns in size. The Cucuteni Tripilia culture stretched across what's now Romania, Moldova, and Ukraine, constructing sprawling communities that housed up to 15,000 people, making them the largest Neolithic settlements the world had ever seen. But what truly sets them apart isn't their scale, it's the eerie ritual they performed every 60 to 80 years. They burned their own villages to the ground. Walk through the ruins of these ancient sites, and you'll find layers upon layers of ash, each representing a meticulously planned destruction. Homes filled with meticulously arranged pottery and tools left untouched before being set ablaze. No signs of violence, no evidence of invaders, just purposeful, almost reverent fires. Some archaeologists believe this was a spiritual act, a way of renewing the land or appeasing gods. Others suggest it was practical, a means of controlling pests or resetting soil fertility. But the most haunting theory, that these burnings were a form of social memory, a way of marking time in a world without writing, ensuring each generation left its own intentional mark on the landscape. Their artistry deepens the mystery. Cucuteni Tripilia pottery swirls with hypnotic spiral motifs, some vessels shaped like goddess figures with exaggerated hips and breasts. These weren't just functional objects, they were expressions of a cosmology we can barely grasp. Recent 3D scans reveal fingerprints pressed into the clay, sometimes from children, hinting at a society where craft and ritual intertwined across generations. Then came the Indo-European migrations around 3000 BCE. Waves of nomadic horsemen from the steppes brought new languages, new gods, and a warrior culture that clashed with the Cucuteni Tripilia's settled agricultural way of life. Genetic studies show a stark shift within centuries. Their distinct DNA markers vanish from the region. Whether through conquest, assimilation, or a slow fading away, their culture dissolved so completely that even their name is a modern invention, stitched together from nearby villages where artifacts first surfaced. What lingers is the unsettling question of why a society capable of such sophistication, with two-story homes, advanced metallurgy, and Europe's earliest known grain storage systems, left no descendants to carry forward their traditions. The Cucuteni Tripilia didn't just disappear, they were overwritten, their spiral patterns and ashen floors buried beneath the roots of the world we know today. When we study them, we're not just looking at a lost culture, we're seeing how fragile human memory can be, even for those who built to last. Long before the first pyramids or Stonehenge, a culture thrived in North America so advanced in weapon making that their spear points became the gold standard for early hunters. The Clovis people, named after the New Mexican site where their distinctive artifacts were first discovered, crafted fluted projectile points so efficient they spread across the continent in what seems like a geological blink. These weren't just tools, they were masterpieces of Stone Age engineering, with a unique groove chipped out of the base to securely attach to wooden shafts. But what truly astonishes archaeologists isn't just their craftsmanship, it's their timing. Around 13,000 years ago, when most of North America lay buried under ice sheets, Clovis hunters pursued mammoths and giant bison across a land bridge-free corridor. Their sites stretch from Alaska to Mexico, suggesting a rapid expansion that some experts believe could have taken less than 500 years. That's faster than the Roman Empire spread, and they had horses and roads. Then comes the mystery. Around 12,800 years ago, right as the last ice age was retreating, something catastrophic happened. The Younger Dryas period hit, a 1,000-year cold snap that plunged temperatures back to glacial conditions. But here's where it gets eerie. At the exact same time, Clovis artifacts vanish from the archaeological record. Mammoths, mastodons, and other megafauna they hunted. Gone too. Some scientists point to geological evidence of a possible comet impact, microscopic diamonds called nanodiamonds found in sediment layers from that era, along with unusually high levels of platinum and melted glass. Others argue for massive meltwater floods from collapsing ice sheets disrupting ocean currents. Either scenario would have triggered wildfires, sudden climate shifts, and the collapse of ecosystems these hunters depended on. The most haunting question isn't just why the Clovis disappeared, it's whether they were the first human victims of climate change in the Americas. Recent discoveries at sites like White Sands, New Mexico, suggest humans may have arrived even earlier, but no culture before or since matched the Clovis' sudden rise and fall. Today, their legacy lives on in scattered stone points and the unsettling realization that even the most adaptable societies can be wiped off the map by forces beyond their control. Their disappearance marks one of prehistory's great cautionary tales, a reminder that when climates shift abruptly, human ingenuity alone isn't always enough. While the world was fixated on pyramids and ziggurats, a civilization quietly thrived in the arid river valleys of coastal Peru without pottery, without weapons, even without visual art as we know it. The Norte Chico, flourishing as early as 3000 BC, built their legacy not in stone monuments but in sound. Their cities hummed with the music of flutes made from pelican bones and the rustle of quipus knotted strings that may hold the secret to the America's first writing system. Imagine walking through Carol, their crown jewel. 6 pyramidal mounds rose from the desert, their ramps and plazas hosting rituals where shell trumpets echoed across the Soup Valley. But what baffles archaeologists isn't what they built, it's what they didn't. No fortifications, no traces of warfare, not even the usual grim indicators of social hierarchy like lavish royal tombs. Instead, they left behind fishnets woven from cotton grown in irrigated fields, evidence of a society that traded anchovies from the coast for wool from the highlands in an economic web stretching hundreds of miles. The quipu is their greatest enigma. These intricate cords, some with over 1,000 knots, weren't just Inca-era inventions as once thought the Norte Chico were tying them millennia earlier. Recent studies suggest the knots' positions, colors, and even twist directions could encode narratives, census data, crop yields, perhaps even myths. But without a living tradition to decode them, these strings remain as silent as the abandoned ceremonial hearths at a sparrow. Why did they vanish around 1800 BC? The mystery deepens when you realize their decline contradicts every standard collapse narrative. No evidence of drought, their sophisticated irrigation canals still functioned. No enemy attacks, not a single weapon has been found in their ruins. Some scholars propose a subtle shift in trade routes as maritime networks bypassed their valleys. Others point to spiritual fatigue as generations grew disillusioned with the labor-intensive rituals that glued their society together. the haunting truth. The Norte Chico didn't so much collapse as evaporate. Later cultures like the Chavin would recycle their architectural styles, unaware of the pioneers who first coaxed civilization from the Peruvian desert. Today, their quippers dangle in museum cases like unreadable love letters to the future, begging us to untangle the knots of history's quietest disappearance. High on the rugged plateaus of Ethiopia, the Aksumite Empire redefined what an African kingdom could achieve, minting gold coins when Europe was stuck in the Dark Ages, trading with Rome and India, even building obelisks taller than any Egyptian pyramid. This wasn't just another ancient civilization. It was a global player whose influence stretched from the Nile to the Arabian Peninsula. Their capital, Aksum, thrived as a crossroads of commerce where frankincense, ivory, and exotic spices changed hands in markets that buzzed with Greek, Coptic, and Sabaean languages. Take their currency, a radical innovation for sub-Saharan Africa. Aksumite coins bore the faces of kings, some inscribed in Greek to appeal to Mediterranean traders, others proclaiming their rulers king of the Aksumites in Ge'ez, their native script. These weren't crude imitations, they matched the quality of Byzantine mints, a bold statement that this African kingdom stood as equals with the ancient world's superpowers. Then there's the mystery of their stelae, towering granite spires, some reaching 160 feet, carved to resemble multi-story buildings with false doors and windows. The largest, now collapsed, may have weighed 700 tons. How they transported it without wheels remains one of archaeology's great puzzles, but their true legacy lies in faith. In the 4th century, King Azana converted to Christianity, making Aksum among the first empires to embrace the religion officially decades before Rome. Their church claims to house the Ark of the Covenant, guarded by monks in a chapel at Aksumchun. Whether myth or reality, this belief cemented their identity as God's chosen people in the Horn of Africa. So why did this sophisticated society crumble after the 7th century CE? Theories collide like desert winds. Soil exhaustion seems plausible. Centuries of intensive farming and deforestation may have turned fertile highlands into dust. Then came Islam's rise as Arab merchants dominated Red Sea trade routes that once fattened Aksum's coffers. But the most dramatic explanation comes from oral traditions. Queen Judith, a shadowy figure who supposedly burned churches and slaughtered the royal family. Some scholars link her to the Jewish Damat kingdom, suggesting a religious revolt against Christian rulers. The haunting truth, Aksum never truly vanished, it faded. Their descendants became the Ethiopian Empire, preserving Ge'ez in religious texts but forgetting how to read their own steles inscriptions. Today, those weathered obelisks stand like silent sentinels, bearing witness to an empire that once dared to challenge Rome's might, only to dissolve into the very landscape it once ruled. In the arid river valleys of northern Peru, the Moche people sculpted their world with pyramids of mud, brick, and gold. A civilization that thrived for 700 years without a written word, yet spoke volumes through their art. Imagine walking through their capital at Cerro Blanco, where the Huaca del Sol pyramid rose like a stepped mountain, built with over 140 million adobe bricks, each one stamped with the mark of its maker. Nearby, the Huaca de la Luna bore vivid murals of the decapitator god, a spider-like deity holding a ceremonial knife, his victim's blood flowing like rivers in frescoes preserved by the desert's dry breath. Their metallurgy stunned archaeologists. While Europe languished in the post-Roman Dark Ages, Moche smiths mastered gilding and soldering, crafting lifelike gold headdresses with movable jaguar pendants and silver cups etched with scenes of ritual combat. Tomb excavations reveal funerary masks so detailed they preserved individual wrinkles, eternal portraits of rulers buried with copper war clubs and jewel-encrusted scepters. But their brilliance wasn't confined to precious metals. Ceramic vessels molded into shockingly realistic faces, warriors with scarred cheeks, elders with sunken eyes hint at a society obsessed with capturing the human form in all its raw imperfections. Then came the rains. Around 600 CE, sediment layers along the Peruvian coast tell a catastrophic story. Repeated El Niño events unleashed biblical floods, washing away irrigation canals and drowning fields in mud. At the Huaca de la Luna, archaeologists uncovered a chilling scene: 40 sacrificed warriors, their bones broken in patterns suggesting ritual dismemberment, buried beneath layers of flood sediment. Nearby, murals were whitewashed and repainted with new deities, as if desperate prayers to old gods had failed. The final act played out at the Dos Cabezas site, where elite tombs from the collapse period hold nobles buried with ropes around their necks, possible victims of political upheaval or sacrificial offerings to end the deluges. By 650 CE, construction on the Great Pyramid ceased. The Moche didn't vanish overnight. They fractured into smaller communities, their art degenerating into crude imitations of past glory. Later cultures like the Chimu would recycle Moche motifs, unaware of the catastrophe that had shattered this once vibrant world. What lingers isn't just the mystery of their fall, but the paradox of their legacy. A people who never invented writing left behind a richer visual record than many literate societies, their goldwork, murals, and ceramics screaming across centuries about power, faith, and the fragile dance between human ambition and nature's fury. The Moche remind us that civilizations don't always end with a whimper or a bang. Sometimes they drown slowly, their last gasps etched in the mud of forgotten temples. High in the sandstone cliffs of the American Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans, often called the Anasazi, carved out a civilization as precariously balanced as their cliffside dwellings. By the 11th century, Choco Canyon was the beating heart of their world, a place where celestial knowledge and earthly power intertwined. The canyon's great houses, like Pueblo Bonito, rose 4 stories high with hundreds of rooms arranged in precise geometric patterns. But what still stuns archaeologists isn't just the scale, it's the sophistication. Their buildings aligned with solar and lunar cycles, their roads stretched straight as arrows across 30 miles of rugged terrain, and their turquoise trade networks reached all the way to Mesoamerica. Then there's the dark side of their story. In the late 12th century, something went terribly wrong. At sites like Cowboy Wash in Colorado, human bones were found cracked open, their marrow extracted, telltale signs of cannibalism. Burned kivas and defaced petroglyphs hint at social unrest, while tree rings reveal a devastating drought that gripped the region for decades. The land turned to dust, and the ancestral Puebloans faced an unthinkable choice: starve or flee. But here's what makes their disappearance so haunting. They didn't just vanish, they left behind perfectly preserved granaries still stocked with corn, sandals tucked away in niches as if owners might return, and cryptic petroglyphs of spirals and horned serpents, perhaps warnings or prayers. By 1300, the great houses stood empty, their echoes replaced by wind whistling through canyon walls. Where did they go? Oral traditions from modern Pueblo tribes like the Hopi and Zuni suggest these were their ancestors, forced to scatter and adapt. Yet the abrupt abandonment of places like Mesa Verde, where entire villages were left intact, feels less like a migration and more like a ritual withdrawal, as if the land itself had become taboo. The ancestral Puebloans remind us that collapse isn't always about conquest or catastrophe. Sometimes it's a quiet retreat, a people stepping back from the edge of history, leaving behind stone towers that still whisper to the desert sky. Across the floodplains of the Mississippi River, a city rose that would dwarf every other settlement north of Mexico, a sprawling metropolis of earthen pyramids, bustling plazas, and rituals that pulsed with cosmic significance. Cahokia, the crown jewel of the Mississippian culture, wasn't just a town, it was a carefully engineered marvel. At its peak around 1100 CE, it housed 20,000 people, more than London at the time, with Monk's Mound towering 100 feet over the landscape, its base covering 14 acres. That's more dirt moved than the Great Pyramid of Giza, all without wheels, beasts of burden, or metal tools. What powered this city? Corn. The Mississippians were master agriculturalists, cultivating vast fields of maize that fueled their population boom. But their true genius lay in urban planning. Cahokia's layout mirrored their cosmology, with mounds arranged like a celestial map. The Grand Plaza, flanked by smaller mounds, was the stage for ceremonies witnessed by thousands, possibly including the infamous Chunky Games, where athletes hurled spears at rolling stone discs while spectators wagered everything from harvested crops to their own freedom. Then there's Woodhenge, a circle of towering red cedar posts aligned with solstices, proving these weren't just farmers, they were astronomers who tracked the heavens with precision. But by 1350 CE, Cahokia stood empty. The clues to its collapse are etched in the soil. Core samples reveal catastrophic flooding episodes around 1200, with the Mississippi bursting its banks and drowning crops. Trees tell another story. Pollen studies show the Cahokians clear-cut entire forests for building material and fuel, triggering erosion that choked their once fertile fields with silt. The social fabric frayed too. Archaeologists find increasing evidence of palisade walls and mass graves, including a pit holding 53 women executed with blunt force trauma. Was this a desperate ruling class tightening control as resources vanished? The haunting twist: Cahokia's descendants didn't vanish, they adapted. The Caddo, Natchez, and other Mississippian successor cultures maintained mound-building traditions into the 18th century. But the lesson lingers in Cahokia's silent mounds. Even the mightiest civilizations can buckle when they gamble everything on a single crop, strain their environment too far, and forget how to bend without breaking. The earth remembers what we forget, and Cahokia's empty plazas whisper warnings we're still learning to hear. At 12,500 feet above sea level, where the air is so thin visitors gasp for breath, the Tiwanaku people built a city that defied logic. Their capital sprawled across the high plains near Lake Titicaca, a place so inhospitable that modern engineers struggle to explain how they farmed there at all. Yet the Tiwanaku didn't just survive, they thrived, carving sandstone blocks with such precision that not even a razor blade could slip between them. Their grand temple, the Acapona, mimicked the sacred Andes Mountains in stepped layers, its walls studded with sculpted stone heads that stared blankly across the Altiplano. What set them apart wasn't just their stonework, it was their mastery of water in a land where rain was scarce. They built raised fields called suka collas, grids of earth mounds separated by canals. These weren't just irrigation ditches, they were microclimate generators. The sun-warmed canal water radiated heat overnight, protecting potatoes and quinoa from frost while nutrient-rich silt fertilized crops. This system yielded harvests 3 times greater than modern farming in the same harsh terrain. At Puma Punku, their ceremonial complex, they worked with andesite so hard it requires diamond-tipped tools today, yet they shaped it into interlocking blocks with geometric perfection, some weighing over 100 tons. Then around 1000 CE, their world unraveled. Sediment cores from Lake Titicaca reveal a 50-year drought so severe it turned their raised fields to dust. But climate alone doesn't explain the violence etched into their ruins. At the Acapona, archaeologists found smashed skulls and dismembered skeletons stuffed into drainage channels, proof of a brutal ending. Some point to invading Aymara warriors, whose descendants still dominate the region. Others blame internal rebellion as starving peasants turned on the elites who claimed divine authority over water. The final insult came from the Incas centuries later. They revered Tiwanaku's ruins as the birthplace of their own gods, yet erased the builders' true history. When Spanish chroniclers arrived, even the locals had forgotten the city's name. Today, the stone faces of Puma Punku stare mutely across the plateau, their creators' language lost, their downfall a cautionary tale of how even the most ingenious adaptations can shatter when nature and human ambition collide. In the rugged highlands of Anatolia, where the land bristles with rocky outcrops, the Hittites forged an empire that rivaled Egypt and Babylon. only to vanish so completely that even their name was forgotten for millennia. Picture Hattusa, their fortified capital, its massive walls studded with carved lions and warriors, its gates guarded by stone sphinxes whispering forgotten spells. This was no ordinary Bronze Age city. Beneath its cobbled streets lay libraries crammed with clay tablets, thousands of diplomatic letters, laws, and rituals meticulously pressed into cuneiform. One remarkable treaty, etched in Akkadian and sealed with royal insignias, reveals a peace agreement with Ramses II after the epic Battle of Kadesh. Proof the Hittites stood toe-to-toe with Egypt's greatest pharaoh. But what truly set them apart was their revolutionary warfare. While others clung to bronze, Hittite smiths mastered ironworking centuries before the Iron Age, crafting weapons that gleamed like dark mirrors. Chariots wrapped in bronze scales thundered across battlefields, each carrying 3 warriors, a driver, a shield-bearer, and an archer raining arrows with terrifying precision. Their horse training manuals, preserved on clay tablets, show an almost scientific approach to breeding and tactics that would influence cavalry warfare for centuries. Then came the fire. Around 1180 BC, Hattusa burned. Archaeologists sifting through the ashes found chilling clues: houses hastily abandoned with meals still on tables, royal archives intentionally smashed, and cuneiform tablets partially melted, their words forever frozen mid-sentence. One fragment mentions enemies from the sea, while another cryptically blames the gods' anger. Modern scholars now see this as part of the late Bronze Age collapse, a domino effect of climate change, marauding sea peoples, and systemic trade disruptions that toppled empires from Greece to Mesopotamia. Yet the Hittites' disappearance feels uniquely eerie. Unlike the Egyptians or Assyrians, whose cultures persisted in some form, the Hittite language, religion, and identity dissolved into Anatolia's soil. Their descendants, the Neo-Hittites, clung to fragments of tradition in smaller city-states, but by the time Homer composed the Iliad, their empire had already faded into myth. Even the location of Hattusa remained lost until 1906, when a German archaeologist stumbled upon its overgrown walls. Today, the restored tablets in Ankara's museums tell a fractured story, one where we can read the Hittites' words but still strain to hear their voices, their final cries swallowed by the same fires that preserved their secrets. Deep in the blistering Sahara, where temperatures can scorch past 120 degrees, the Garamantes built an empire in a place no one thought possible, a civilization fed by rivers that flowed underground. While medieval Europe struggled through the Dark Ages, these desert lords engineered a network of tunnels so vast it could stretch from Rome to Paris, tapping into water trapped beneath the sand for millennia. Their capital, Garama, rose from the Libyan desert like a mirage, its mud brick palaces and temples surrounded by date palms and wheat fields in what's now one of the most inhospitable places on earth. The secret to their survival, the Fagara, a system of underground channels that siphoned water from ancient aquifers, some as deep as 600 feet below the surface. Picture teams of workers digging vertical shafts every 100 feet, then connecting them with gently sloping tunnels that guided water to the surface by gravity alone. These weren't crude ditches, they were feats of precision engineering with ceramic linings to prevent collapse and inspection ports for maintenance. Over 1,000 miles of these tunnels turned the Garamantes into the Romans of the Sahara, supporting a population of 100,000 in a land where rain might not fall for years. Their cities thrived on trade too. Garamantian caravans, led by the indigenous Saharan breed of horses they domesticated, crossed dunes to exchange salt and gemstones with Mediterranean merchants. Gold from sub-Saharan Africa passed through their hands, while Roman glass and Greek pottery filled their elite tombs. Evidence suggests they even battled the Roman Empire to a standstill, with one inscription boasting how a Garamantian king brought terror to the lands of the Fezzan. But their brilliance sowed the seeds of collapse. Every drop they drew from those fossil aquifers, water trapped since the last ice age, was irreplaceable. By 700 CE, the tunnels ran dry. Tree rings and sediment cores tell a grim story. As the water tables dropped, the Garamantes dug deeper, exhausting their reserves faster than nature could replenish them. The final blow may have come from the Islamic conquests as new trade routes bypassed their dying cities. Today, the ruins of Garama stand encircled by dunes, its irrigation shafts choked with sand, a cautionary tale of how even the most ingenious societies can crumble when they outdrink their future. What lingers isn't just the mystery of their disappearance, but the eerie parallels to our own era. Modern Libyan cities now pump from those same ancient aquifers with electric drills instead of hand-dug tunnels. The Garamantes' ghostly fagara remind us that civilizations often don't fall to invaders or disasters, but to the slow, invisible draining of the very resources that made them mighty. In the Sahara's silence, their empty reservoirs whisper a warning we're still learning to hear. Long before the kingdoms of Mali and Ghana rose to prominence, a mysterious culture in what's now Nigeria was shaping iron and sculpting art that still leaves archaeologists speechless. The Nok people, flourishing around 1500 BC, didn't just master metalworking, they did it centuries before most of Europe even discovered furnaces. Their terracotta sculptures, with their elaborate hairstyles and hauntingly expressive eyes, reveal a society bursting with creativity and technical skill. But what's truly baffling isn't what they left behind, it's how completely they disappeared, leaving no written records, no obvious descendants, just fragments of a civilization that once thrived in the shadows of the jungle. The Nok's terracotta figures are unlike anything else in ancient Africa. Imagine life-sized human heads with triangular eyes and parted lips, coiled hairstyles so intricate they must have represented real people, not just archetypes. Some sculptures wear beads and arm rings, others grasp weapons or kneel in what might be prayer. But here's the twist, these weren't decorative trinkets. Many show signs of deliberate breakage, suggesting they played a role in rituals, perhaps smashed to release spiritual energy or symbolically kill an enemy. The level of detail is staggering, with individual facial scars and textured fabrics preserved in clay, offering us frozen glimpses of a people who valued individuality in an era when most art depicted gods or rulers. Then there's their iron. Nok smelters built furnaces reaching temperatures over 1800 degrees, hot enough to liquefy rock. They didn't just make simple tools, they produced carbon steel, a technology Europe wouldn't master for another 1,000 years. Evidence from sites like Taruga reveals slag heaps the size of small hills, proof of industrial-scale metal production. But why did a culture with such advanced metallurgy leave no swords or armor? The answer might lie in their environment. Unlike war-torn Europe, the Nok lived in a region where survival depended more on farming than conquest. Their iron hoes and axes transformed the land, clearing forests for yam and millet fields that fed growing villages. So what happened to them? Around 500 CE, their villages emptied out. The kilns fell cold, the sculptures stopped being made, and the jungle crept back over their furnaces. Unlike other collapses, there's no layer of ash from invasion, no mass graves from plague. Instead, pollen studies tell a quieter story, a shifting climate. The West African monsoon began failing, turning fertile savannas into dust bowls. Without steady rains, the Nok's iron tools couldn't save their crops. Some scholars believe they fractured into smaller groups, their knowledge diffusing into later cultures like Ife and Benin. Others argue they migrated south, blending with Bantu-speaking peoples. But one thing's certain, their legacy didn't vanish completely. Those coiled hairstyles in Nok sculptures, you'll spot nearly identical styles in modern Nigerian communities, a thread of cultural memory stretching across 2 millennia. The real mystery isn't just why the Nok disappeared, it's how a society so advanced left so few clues to its downfall. Their terracotta heads stare at us across the centuries, their lips sealed tight, guarding secrets we may never uncover. In the end, the Nok remind us that civilizations don't always end with fire and ruin. Sometimes they simply fade, like embers cooling in the dark, leaving only echoes in the art and traditions of those who came after. Buried beneath the shifting sands of China's Taklamakan Desert lie some of history's most startling secrets, perfectly preserved mummies with European features, their flaxen hair still bright, their felted wool clothing dyed in vibrant crimsons and blues. These aren't the expected ancestors of modern East Asians, but tall, fair-skinned people with round eyes and high noses, their bodies so intact you can still see the tattoos curling around their arms. Dating back as early as 1800 BC, the Tarim mummies present a riddle that rewrites our understanding of ancient migration. How did an unmistakably Caucasian culture thrive in the heart of Asia, thousands of miles from their genetic kin? The mystery deepens when you examine their world. Take the beauty of Lulan, a mummy so lifelike her eyelashes still flutter in the desert wind, buried in a boat-shaped coffin, a tradition unheard of in China. She wore a goatskin cloak and leather boots lined with fur, her grave stocked with wheat, barley, and a woven basket holding medicinal ephedra. Nearby, the Chechen man was found with 10 hats, his burgundy tunic stitched with intricate patterns resembling Celtic knots, his face covered in a red ochre paste that may have held ritual significance. These weren't wandering nomads, they were part of a sophisticated farming society that cultivated crops along oasis rivers, their textiles showcasing weaving techniques as advanced as anything in Bronze Age Europe. Then there's the language. Linguists believe these people spoke Tocharian, an extinct branch of the Indo-European family once thought confined to Europe and South Asia. Manuscripts discovered in nearby Tarim Basin monasteries confirm its syllables like nen, meaning woman, and sem, earth, eerily similar to Old English and Sanskrit. This wasn't just a trade pidgin, it was a full-fledged tongue with poetry and religious texts, proof that a slice of Europe had somehow taken root in China's driest corner. So why did they vanish? The clues point to a slow cultural smothering. By 200 CE, Han Chinese expansion and the rise of the Xiongnu nomads squeezed the Tocharians from all sides. Some were absorbed into the growing Silk Road melting pot, their genes dissolving into local populations. Others may have fled west, their legacy surviving only in the blonde-haired, green-eyed Ikers who still live in the region today. But the most haunting evidence comes from their graves. Later mummies show East Asian features creeping in, their burial styles hybridizing until one day no more boat coffins were built, no more Tocharian words were spoken. The Tarim mummies force us to confront how fluid identity really is. These weren't invaders or temporary settlers. They were a people who called this harsh desert home for nearly 2,000 years, only to fade like footprints in the sand. Their silent, preserved faces remind us that history's margins are filled with forgotten chapters, and that even the most resilient cultures can vanish without leaving behind a single spoken word. The Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta isn't just a mountain range, it's a lost world. Rising like a stepped pyramid from Colombia's Caribbean coast, these cloud-shrouded peaks sheltered one of the America's most enigmatic civilizations, the Tairona. While the Inca and Aztec built empires, the Tairona sculpted their kingdom into the mountainsides, terracing sheer slopes into cities that seemed to defy gravity. Their stone-paved roads zigzagged up cliffs, connecting circular plazas and thatched temples where priests in jaguar pelts performed rituals under the watchful eyes of golden condors. What set the Tairona apart wasn't just their engineering, it was their gold. Their smiths crafted pendants so thin they floated on water, yet detailed enough to show every feather on a bat's wings. They perfected tumbaga, an alloy of gold and copper that sparkled like the sun but could be hammered into intricate forms. Recent scans of a famous Tairona pectoral revealed microscopic solder points no thicker than a human hair, evidence of a metallurgical skill unmatched in pre-Columbian America. These weren't just decorations, they were cosmic maps, A single necklace might depict the entire Tarona universe, frogs symbolizing water, serpents for wisdom, and spirals representing the sacred mountains where gods dwelled. Then came the Spanish. In 1599, conquistadors under Gonzalo Jimenez de Quesada launched a brutal campaign up the Baratoca River, lured by tales of a city of gold. What they found shocked them: terraced farms yielding 5 harvests a year, stone reservoirs with filtered water systems, and temples gleaming with gold ornaments. But the Tarona didn't surrender quietly. They retreated higher, burning their own bridges to cut off pursuit. When the Spanish finally breached Ciudad Perdida, their mountaintop stronghold, they found abandoned plazas and silent shrines. No treasure, no people, just the whisper of wind through empty doorways. The survivors didn't vanish, they transformed. Today's Kogi people, who call themselves the Elder Brothers, believe they are the Tarona's direct descendants. Their priests, called mamos, still wear white robes symbolizing the snow-capped peaks their ancestors revered. But their oral histories tell a darker story, of smallpox-stricken villages where corpses rotted unburied, of sacred gold objects tossed into lakes to keep them from Spanish hands. Satellite images recently revealed over 200 undiscovered Tarona settlements. Yet the Kogi refuse to disclose their locations. To them, these aren't archaeological sites, they're graves. The haunting lesson of the Tarona isn't just about conquest, it's about adaptation. Where other cultures fought to the last warrior, the Tarona chose exile over extinction, carrying their knowledge into the clouds. Their stone cities may lie abandoned, but their spiritual legacy endures in every Kogi prayer, a whisper from a civilization that refused to die, even as its gold was melted into Spanish coins. The mountains remember what history books forgot. Long before Korea's Silla kingdom unified the peninsula under its golden crowns, the land buzzed with a patchwork of confederacies whose stories now lie half-buried in riverbeds and rice paddies. The Jinhan, Byeonhan, and Mahan cultures weren't just precursors to later kingdoms. They were vibrant societies with distinct identities, each weaving their own threads into Korea's cultural fabric. Picture the Nakdong River Valley around 300 BCE, where Jinhan potters shaped elegant tall-necked jars with comb-pattern designs, their ceramics traded as far as Japan. Nearby, Byeonhan blacksmiths forged iron tools that transformed agriculture, while Mahan's 12 tribes gathered under sacred oak trees to resolve disputes in assemblies that may have inspired later Korean governance. Yet for all their influence, these confederacies remain shadowy figures in history. The problem isn't a lack of artifacts, it's their silence. Unlike China's meticulous Han Dynasty records describing Samhun peoples, Korean sources from this era barely survived. The most tantalizing clues come from tomb excavations. In Gim-hee, a Jinhan chieftain's burial yielded a jade ornament shaped like a bear's claw, echoing myths of sacred animals founding their lineages. Nearby Daegu's Byeonhan sites reveal something startling. Roman glass beads and Persian-style bronze mirrors, proof these weren't isolated villages but nodes in a trade network stretching across Eurasia. The real mystery lies in how these cultures dissolved. Mahan's fate is particularly haunting. Once the largest confederacy with 54 recorded tribes, its capital territory now lies beneath modern Seoul's sprawl. Recent LiDAR scans near Pyeongtaek revealed grid patterns suggesting Mahan's settlements were far more urbanized than previously thought. Their rice storage pits could feed thousands. Then around 400 CE, their pottery styles abruptly change, blending with Silla and Beech influences. Was this conquest, cultural exchange? The answer may lie in a single pivotal artifact, a sword excavated from a Mahan tomb in Iksan. Its blade bearing inscriptions in both indigenous and Silla scripts, a linguistic handshake between vanishing and emerging world. Archaeologists face a unique challenge with these cultures. Unlike the Maya or Egyptians, the Jinhan, Byeonhan, and Mahan left no towering monuments. Their legacy hides in subtle details, the way a 5th century Silla crown mimics Jinhan earring designs, or how Byeonhan's iron-making techniques resurface in Gaya Kingdom armor. Even their names tease us. Han likely meant great or leader in their lost languages, but the prefixes Jin true, Byeon brilliant, Ma mother are interpretations filtered through later historians. Walking through Korea's National Museum, you'll notice how displays label these peoples as proto-Three Kingdoms, framing them as stepping stones rather than civilizations worthy of study in their own right. The greatest tragedy isn't their disappearance, it's how thoroughly they've been overshadowed. When a Silla queen wore gold girdles adorned with mythical fish, was she channeling Mahan water deities? When beach musicians played hourglass-shaped drums, were they echoing Byeonhan rhythms? These questions linger because the confederacies didn't leave histories, they became history, absorbed so completely that even their oral traditions faded into the land itself. Today, farmers still plow up Jinhin pottery shards along the Naktong, unaware they're touching fragments of a world that once saw itself not as a prelude but as the center of the story. The windswept steppes of Central Asia have swallowed countless peoples whole, but few transformations are as baffling as that of the Yuezhi. Originally recorded in Chinese chronicles as nomadic herders with faces like the moon, a poetic nod to their fair complexions, they dominated the jade trade routes stretching from the Tarim Basin to the Han Empire's frontier. Their caravans carried more than just precious stones. They were cultural middlemen, exchanging Persian glass for Chinese silk long before the Silk Road had a name. Then, in a single generation, they vanished from their homeland, fleeing west under the thunder of Xiongnu horse hooves. What happened next would reshape the ancient world in ways no chronicler could have predicted. The Xiongnu, feared horse lords of the Mongolian plains, struck the Yuezhi like a desert storm around 176 BC. Chinese historians recorded the brutal aftermath, a Yuezhi king's skull repurposed as a Xiongnu drinking cup, his people scattering like birds before hawks. But this wasn't the end, it was the beginning of an odyssey. The Yuezhi survivors trekked 1,600 miles across mountains and deserts, finally settling in Bactria, modern Afghanistan. Here, in the ruins of Greek kingdoms left by Alexander the Great's successors, something extraordinary occurred. Within a century, these displaced nomads emerged reborn as the Kushan Empire, rulers of a realm stretching from the Ganges to the Caspian Sea. Their metamorphosis remains one of history's most striking cultural alchemies. Early Kushan coins tell the story, first imitating Greek designs with inscriptions in broken Greek, then blending Persian fire altars with Hindu deities, and finally depicting their own kings in hybrid Greco-Buddhist art styles. The most famous, King Kanishka, commissioned gold dinars showing him lighting a sacred flame while Buddha meditates on the reverse, a visual manifesto of an empire comfortable in multiple worlds. At their capital near Peshawar, archaeologists unearthed a Zoroastrian temple steps from a Buddhist stupa, while Sanskrit medical texts cite Yuezhi herbal knowledge preserved from their steppe past. Yet the haunting question lingers, how much of the original Yuezhi survived? Chinese accounts from the Han Dynasty describe their pre-exile rituals, sky burials where bodies were left on platforms for birds, fermented mare's milk libations, and moon-shaped amulets. Almost none of this appears in Kushan sites. Did they willingly shed their identity to rule diverse subjects, or was their culture always more adaptable than outsiders assumed? The few clues whisper through time. A 1st century CE Roman historian mentions Kushan envoys presenting tribal songs to Emperor Augustus, while a Buddhist manuscript from Gandhara casually references Yuezhi healing chants used alongside Sanskrit mantras. Their legacy pulses in unexpected places. The towering Buddhas of Bamiyan, destroyed by the Taliban in 2001, were originally commissioned by Kushan artisans blending Indian and Hellenistic styles. The Yuezhi's jade trading expertise may have inspired the nephrite routes that later fed Tang dynasty workshops. Even the term Tocharian, used for those mysterious Tarim mummies, comes from a misreading of Kushan-era documents. Like a river disappearing into desert sands only to resurface miles away, the Yuezhi didn't truly vanish, they seeped into the bedrock of Eurasian history, their origins remembered only in the startled notes of scribes who never imagined nomads could build an empire that outshone their own. Perched atop a flattened mountaintop in southern Mexico, Monte Albán wasn't just a city, it was a celestial mirror. The Zapotecs carved this sprawling metropolis from limestone, leveling the entire summit to align their temples with the stars. At its height around 500 CE, its grand plaza pulsed with astronomers tracking Venus, ball players ricocheting rubber balls off carved stone hoops, and scribes recording history in a script that still defies full decipherment. Their glyphs, a mix of animal motifs and abstract symbols, adorned staircases and tombs boasting of conquered cities and royal bloodlines. Unlike the Maya, who preferred jungles, or the Aztecs with their island capital, the Zapotecs chose the clouds, building their world where eagles soared and thunderstorms rumbled below. Then came the silence. By 900 CE, Monte Albán's ceremonial core stood empty. Not burned, not sacked, abandoned with an eerie precision. Excavations revealed chilling details, altars still smeared with the residue of final sacrifices, unbroken pottery stacked in corners, and elite tombs sealed undisturbed. This wasn't a hasty retreat, it was a deliberate departure. The question is, why? Drought theories point to sediment cores from nearby Lake Chichancanab, where mineral layers record a century-long dry spell devastating maize crops. But here's the twist. Monte Albán's reservoirs, ingeniously designed to channel rainwater into underground cisterns, still held water when the city emptied. If the drought was severe enough to collapse their agriculture, why didn't they fight for this last stronghold? Warfare clues are just as puzzling. Defensive walls snake around the city's edges, and carvings depict bound captives, proof of conflict. Yet there's no evidence of a final battle, no mass graves, no scorch marks on the palaces. Some archaeologists suggest internal revolt, pointing to smashed elite monuments at outlying Zapotec sites. Imagine a peasant uprising so complete that priests and rulers fled without a fight, their gods discredited by failing rains. The most haunting theory lies in the stars themselves. Zapotec cosmology centered on balance between earth and sky, rulers and farmers. When drought withered crops and rebellions fractured society, the elites may have interpreted this as cosmic disharmony. Perhaps they didn't flee in defeat, but in ritual surrender, walking away from a city the gods had clearly abandoned. Today, Monte Albán's empty plazas echo with that unanswered question: was this collapse or transcendence? The stones won't say, they simply watch as they have for 12 centuries over valleys where Zapotec descendants still speak the language of the clouds. South of Egypt, where the Nile carves a fertile ribbon through the Sahara, the kingdom of Kush rose not in Egypt's shadow but as its equal. These weren't mere imitators of pyramid builders, they were innovators who perfected the art. While the world fixates on Giza, over 200 pyramids still stand in Sudan, their steep angles and narrow bases creating a skyline unlike anything in Egypt. The kings and queens buried here ruled an empire so powerful they conquered Egypt itself in the 8th century BCE, founding the 25th dynasty. Pharaohs like Taharqa didn't just occupy the throne, they revived ancient traditions, commissioning temples from Thebes to Napata, their inscriptions blending Egyptian hieroglyphs with distinctly Nubian symbols of lions and archers. What set Kush apart was its mastery of two worlds. At Marame, their later capital, iron furnaces blazed day and night, producing weapons and tools that fueled trade across Africa. The city's slag heaps still tower over the desert, testament to an industrial might Egypt never matched. Yet they also cherished traditions older than the pharaohs. Meroitic script, one of Africa's earliest writing systems, adorned temple walls and royal decrees, though its cursive symbols remain only partially deciphered, hiding court intrigues and trade agreements beneath their elegant curves. Then came the sand. By 350 CE, Mara lay in ruins. Theories about its fall read like a checklist of ancient catastrophes. Aksumite armies from Ethiopia left inscriptions boasting of burning towns and capturing slaves, but pollen samples tell another story. Layers of dust in Nile sediment cores revealed decades of failed floods as the desert crept closer to fields that once fed thousands, the cruelest twist. Kush's ironworking may have doomed its forests. To smelt 1 ton of iron required chopping down an acre of acacia trees, a trade-off between short-term power and long-term survival. Yet the most haunting evidence isn't in battle scars or drought records, it's in the silence that followed. When Christian missionaries reached Mara centuries later, they found locals who recalled nothing of the pyramid builders. The very name Kush had faded into biblical echoes, leaving behind only sandstone lions staring blankly across a land that forgot their roar. Today, as archaeologists piece together fragments of Meroitic pottery and gold necklaces shaped like ram's heads, they confront a painful truth. Some declines aren't dramatic collapses, but slow fades into obscurity where even conquerors forget what they destroyed. On the pearlescent shores of the Persian Gulf, where desert sands meet turquoise waters, the Dilmun civilization built a paradise, mentioned in Sumerian cuneiform as the land where the sun rises, and in Epic of Gilgamesh as a blessed realm of immortality. This wasn't just another Bronze Age trading post, it was the Mediterranean world's gateway to the Indus Valley. At its peak around 2000 BC, Dilmun's harbors teemed with ships carrying copper from Oman, ivory from Africa, and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. Their merchants acted as middlemen in history's first global trade network, taking cuts of profit so large that Mesopotamian kings complained in clay tablet letters about Dilmun's exorbitant prices. What set them apart wasn't just wealth, it was water. In a region where freshwater was scarcer than gold, Dilmun's artisans engineered natural springs into a labyrinth of irrigation channels. Date palms thrived in their oasis capital of Kalat al-Bahrain, while coral stone houses stayed cool without a single drop wasted. Their burial mounds tell silent stories of this prosperity. Over 170,000 dot the landscape, some 2-storied tombs for elites filled with Mesopotamian cylinder seals and Indus Valley carnelian beads. The grandest, at Ali, stretch 45 feet across, their chambers lined with imported Persian limestone, a funeral display rivaling Egyptian pharaohs. Then came the unraveling. Around 500 BC, the same seas that made Dilmun rich turned against it. Persian engineers developed deeper-hulled ships capable of bypassing Bahrain entirely, sailing straight from India to Mesopotamia. Climate shifts may have played a role. 2 core samples from Gulf sediments show increasing salinity as freshwater springs dried up. The final blow came from empires. First the Babylonians, then the Persians absorbed Dilmun's territories, rerouting trade to mainland ports. Yet their disappearance feels less like collapse than evaporation. Unlike cities sacked by invaders, Dilmun's settlements show no layers of ash. The temples at Barbar were carefully abandoned, their altars cleared of idols before the doors were sealed. Even their writing, a still undeciphered script resembling early Arabian inscriptions, faded gradually, replaced by Aramaic on later pottery shards. Today, bulldozers building Bahrain's skyscrapers occasionally uncover another burial mound, spilling forth pearls that fed Dilmun's glory. These silent mounds hold the civilization's last joke on history, having controlled the ancient world's trade in precious stones. They became treasures themselves, waiting in the sand for modern hands to lift them back into the light. Buried beneath the fertile soils of the Danube River Valley, strange markings on clay fragments whisper of a civilization that may have invented writing 4,000 years before the Sumerians. The Vinča culture, thriving between 5500 and 4500 BC in what's now Serbia and Romania, didn't just farm the land, they transformed it into Europe's first known urban experiment. Picture sprawling settlements housing up to 3,000 people, their mud brick houses packed so tightly that lanes wound like maze corridors between them. These weren't primitive villages, they were proto-cities with two-story homes, specialized workshops, and communal ovens large enough to bake bread for hundreds. What sets the Vinča apart isn't just their scale, it's the symbols. Over 1,000 inscribed artifacts bear a repertoire of 200 recurring marks, comb-like strokes, branching crosses, and looping spirals etched into pottery, figurines, and clay tablets. Some appear alone, others in sequences that tantalizingly resemble writing. A broken clay vessel from Tartaria bears symbols strikingly similar to later Sumerian cuneiform. Three etched rows that some scholars believe might represent the world's earliest financial ledger or ritual calendar. The debate rages, were these sacred sigils property marks or a true script still waiting to be deciphered? The haunting possibility lingers that if the Vinča did develop writing, their knowledge died with them, setting back the timeline of literacy by millennia. Their craftsmanship reveals unexpected sophistication. Vinča metallurgists smelted copper as early as 5400 BC, centuries before the metal revolution swept the Near East. Excavations at Plochnik uncovered a copper chisel and axe heads, their surfaces still gleaming after 7,000 years in the earth. Their figurines unsettle modern eyes, plump goddess statues with mask-like faces and hollow eyes, some clutching their breasts or bellies in gestures echoing later Cycladic art. Most eerie are the alien figurines, elongated skulls with slit-pupilled eyes that some fringe theorists absurdly link to extraterrestrials, but archaeologists recognize as ritual objects representing shamanic trance states. Then comes the mystery of their vanishing. Around 4500 BCE, Vinča sites show signs of violent upheaval, burned houses, shattered altars, and cemeteries where women and children lie buried beside men with fractured skulls. Some point to the Kurgan hypothesis, waves of Indo-European horsemen from the steppes, their wheeled chariots and bronze weapons overwhelming Neolithic farmers. But newer evidence complicates this narrative. Pollen studies reveal a dramatic shift. Oak forests gave way to drought-resistant sagebrush, suggesting climate change devastated their wheat-based agriculture. At the Vinča below Biardio site, the final layers show houses rebuilt smaller and flimsier, as if each generation grew poorer than the last. The true tragedy of the Vinča isn't just their collapse, it's how thoroughly they were forgotten. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, no later civilization preserved their legends. When Serbian peasants plowed up strange clay idols in the 19th century, they assumed they'd found devilish talismans. Today, as linguists debate whether those cryptic symbols encode language or merely proto-writing, we're left staring at fragments of a world that may have held answers to one of humanity's greatest questions: where and when did we first begin to write? The Vinča's silent clay tablets offer no reply, only the unsettling notion that history's ledger might forever balance with missing entries. In the fertile Sichuan basin, far from the well-documented Shang dynasty along the Yellow River, a culture emerged that would challenge everything we thought we knew about ancient China. The Sanxingdui people didn't just make bronze, they redefined it. Picture masks unlike anything found elsewhere in the ancient world. Some with protruding dragon-like eyes stretching 5 inches outward, others with gold foil still clinging to their angular faces after 3,000 years. These weren't portraits of living rulers but visions from another realm, their exaggerated features suggesting gods, demons, or perhaps shamanic visions made solid. The discovery in 1986 stunned archaeologists. 2 sacrificial pits yielded over 1,000 artifacts, 8-foot-tall bronze trees with hanging leaves and birds, life-sized human figures kneeling in prayer, jade axes the size of tabletops, all deliberately broken, burned, and buried in what appears to be a single apocalyptic ceremony. The craftsmanship defies explanation. Some bronze castings were welded using techniques Europe wouldn't develop for another 2 millennia, while the gold content in their foils reaches 95% purity, rivaling Tutankhamun's treasures. Most baffling, their artistic language shares almost nothing with contemporaneous Shang bronzes. Where Shang vessels celebrated real animals and ancestor worship, Sanxingdui's art feels hallucinatory. A bronze wheel with 5 spokes like a sun symbol, a 3-foot-wide mask with ears like winged serpents. Then there's the silence. Around 1000 BC, at the height of their sophistication, Sanxingdui's workshops fell quiet. The pits containing their shattered masterpieces show no signs of invasion, no weapons, no mass graves. Instead, the damage appears ritualistic, as if the people themselves systematically destroyed their sacred objects. Some scholars point to earthquake evidence in the stratigraphy, perhaps interpreting tremors as divine wrath. Others note climate records showing catastrophic flooding of the Min River around this time, but the most haunting clue comes from later texts. The ancient Shu kingdom's records mention a civilization swallowed by clouds, its people fleeing after the heavens withdrew their favor. The mystery deepens when you realize we don't even know what they called themselves. Sanxingdui is just the modern village where the pits were found. Their writing, if they had any, hasn't survived. Unlike the Shang with their oracle bones, these artisans left no inscriptions, no king lists, just a visual scream frozen in bronze and jade. Recent DNA analysis adds another layer. The Sanxingdui people carried genetic markers distinct from both the Shang and modern Sichuan populations, suggesting an entirely separate cultural branch that simply ended. Perhaps the most jarring realization: had those pits remained buried just a few feet deeper, we might never have known this civilization existed at all. Their rediscovery in the 20th century was pure accident. A farmer digging a drainage ditch struck gold-covered bronze. It makes you wonder how many other Sanxingduis lie beneath our feet, their stories waiting to shatter our narratives about the past. Their broken masks stare up through time not as artifacts, but as questions. What magnificent visions died with the hands that shaped them? In the barren reaches of Mauritania's Sahara, where scorching winds now whip across endless dunes, the stone ruins of the Tichit tradition stand as ghostly reminders of a lost urban experiment. These weren't just simple villages, they were West Africa's first known complex society, thriving between 2000 and 500 BC in what was then a lush savanna. Picture concentric rings of dristone walls rising from the landscape, their layout so precise they rival later medieval fortifications. The largest settlement, Dihar Tichit, sprawled across 60 acres, its streets dividing neighborhoods of circular huts, granaries perched on stilts to deter pests, and communal spaces where cattle herds were counted with notched tally sticks. What's astonishing isn't just their scale, it's their adaptability. The Tichit people didn't just endure their environment, they engineered it. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of flood retreat farming, where they harnessed seasonal rains to grow pearl millet in depressions between rock outcrops. Their stone-lined cisterns trapped every precious drop, while livestock pens built into hillsides kept goats and cattle safe from predators. Even their art reflects this harmony. Rock carvings at Audafle show giraffes and antelopes grazing beside herds with distinctive humped backs, proof that this now desolate region once teemed with life. Then came the drying. Around 500 BC, pollen samples from lake beds tell a grim story. Grasses gave way to drought-resistant acacias, then vanished altogether. The Tichit's carefully managed landscape became a trap. At Karkarkinkat, excavations reveal granaries abandoned mid-fill, their contents carbonized by sudden fires, perhaps last-ditch attempts to smoke out pests as food stores dwindled. At Akrajit, a stone altar was found stacked with unused grindstones, as if a harvest ritual was interrupted midway. Unlike other collapses where people fled to new lands, the Tichit had nowhere to go. By the time the Romans ruled the Mediterranean, their settlements were already buried under advancing dunes. The real mystery lies in what they left behind. Their peculiar pottery, decorated with twisting chord patterns, shares uncanny similarities with ceramics from the Niger River valley hundreds of miles southeast. Were these the desperate migrations of a dying culture? Some linguists even suggest the Tichit may have been early ancestors of the Sonic people who later founded the Khmer Empire. If true, their greatest legacy wasn't stone walls or millet farms, it was knowledge carried south by refugees, seeds of urbanism that would later sprout into Sahel's golden kingdoms. Today, the ruins whisper a warning written in sedimentary layers and scattered cattle bones. The Tichit didn't fail, they succeeded brilliantly until the very land that nourished them turned to dust. Their story forces us to ask, in our own era of climate upheaval, how many modern cities might one day be found half-buried, their skyscrapers as enigmatic to future archaeologists as these Saharan stones are to us. Scattered across the Pacific like pieces of a forgotten map, fragments of intricately patterned pottery tell the story of history's most audacious sailors, the Lapita. These weren't just artisans shaping clay, they were pioneers who crossed thousands of miles of open ocean in double-hulled canoes, carrying with them the seeds of future Polynesian cultures. Their signature pottery, stamped with geometric designs using delicate toothed combs, serves as a breadcrumb trail across the sea, from the Bismarck Archipelago near New Guinea all the way to Tonga and Samoa, a maritime leap spanning nearly 2,500 miles by 1,500 BC. What makes the Lapita extraordinary isn't just their seafaring, it's what they brought with them. Each shard of their distinctive pottery acts as a cultural time capsule. Excavations reveal shells from island beaches hundreds of miles apart, obsidian traded across volcanic island chains, and bones of domesticated pigs and chickens, proof they didn't just drift with the currents, but planned voyages to colonize new land. Their settlements followed a meticulous pattern: coastal villages on pristine beaches, earth ovens lined with heated stones for cooking, and burial sites where the dead were laid to rest with shell ornaments and pottery offerings. At the Tiauma site in Vanuatu, archaeologists uncovered a mass grave with 30 individuals, their skulls carefully removed after burial and placed on their chests, a ritual hinting at complex ancestor veneration. Yet for all their influence, the Lapita left behind one glaring silence: their language. Linguists reconstruct their speech only through echoes in modern Polynesian tongues, where words like tapu, sacred, and mana, spiritual power, might be their linguistic legacy. Their origins are equally mysterious. Genetic studies suggest they descended from a mix of Southeast Asian mariners and indigenous Melanesians, but their rapid expansion, covering the distance from Rome to Moscow in just a few centuries, defies easy explanation. How did they navigate without compasses or charts? Oral traditions across Polynesia speak of star paths and wave patterns, but the Lapita's own knowledge died with them. Around 500 BC, their pottery vanishes from the archaeological record, but this wasn't a collapse, it was a metamorphosis. In Fiji, later layers show Lapita designs simplifying, then disappearing entirely as new styles emerge. The same happens in Samoa, where plainware replaces stamped patterns. Rather than vanishing, the Lapita likely blended into the cultures they seeded, their descendants becoming the Polynesians who would eventually settle Hawaii, Rapa Nui, and Aotearoa. Yet the abrupt end of their pottery tradition raises haunting questions. Did shifting trade networks make intricate designs impractical? Did new religious beliefs abandon old symbols, or did their identity simply dissolve into the vastness of the Pacific, like salt in seawater? The Lapita's true legacy isn't just in clay fragments or scattered shell middens, it's in the way their voyages reshaped the human story. When Maori navigators later steered by the stars to New Zealand, or Hawaiian chanters recited genealogies tracing back to Hawaii, they were drawing from a heritage the Lapita helped create. Their disappearance feels less like an ending than a handing off, a passing of the torch across generations. Today, as rising seas threaten to swallow many of their coastal sites, we're left racing to decode the messages they stamped into clay, not just geometric patterns, but the blueprint of an entire oceanic world pressed into earth and fired by time. The Greek poet Hesiod described a land beyond the Pillars of Hercules where silver flowed like rivers and kings dined at tables of solid bronze. To the Phoenicians, they were the masters of precious metals traders whose ships carried tin from Cornwall and amber from the Baltic. The Tartessians weren't just another Bronze Age society. They were the invisible economic engine of the Mediterranean, a civilization so wealthy their capital became synonymous with myth. Nestled in the Guadalquivir River delta of modern Spain, their kingdom thrived as Europe's first urban culture west of the Aegean, blending indigenous Iberian traditions with Phoenician influences into something entirely new. What set them apart wasn't just riches, it was their metallurgical genius. While others prized gold, the Tartessians built their fortune on silver and electrum, a natural gold-silver alloy. At the Cabezo de San Pedro site, archaeologists found slag heaps suggesting industrial-scale smelting, along with intricate jewelry featuring granulation techniques so precise they resembled constellations. Their most famous artifact, the Carambolo treasure, 21 golden pieces discovered by construction workers in 1958, including pectorals and bracelets adorned with intricate solar motifs. These weren't mere decorations, they were cosmological maps aligning with solstice events observed at Tartessian shrines. The real enigma lies in their language. Tartessian inscriptions carved on stone slabs and bronze votives bear eerie similarities to both Phoenician letters and later Iberian scripts, yet remain stubbornly undeciphered. The longest example, the Mesas du Castellinho stele, features 86 symbols arranged in horizontal lines, possibly recording laws or dedications to their bull god Nito. Unlike Linear B or Egyptian hieroglyphs, there's no bilingual Rosetta Stone to crack its code. Some linguists suggest it represents a linguistic missing link between Indo-European and pre-Celtic tongues, while others argue it's an isolate, a language without living relatives. Then, around 500 BCE, their cities fell silent. The classical historian Strabo blamed earthquakes and tidal waves, while modern sediment cores from Doñana National Park reveal layers of marine sand mixed with Tartessian pottery shards, evidence of catastrophic flooding. But was it purely natural? Recent excavations at Hulva show signs of abrupt abandonment, with half-melted bronze ingots left in furnace pits, suggesting a sudden crisis. Some speculate the Phoenicians, envious of their trade monopoly, orchestrated their downfall. Others point to internal collapse, their reliance on finite silver mines possibly triggering resource wars. The most haunting clue comes from mythology. Greek legends speak of Tartesso's last king, Arganthonios, who supposedly ruled for 80 years before his city sank beneath the waves. Plato's Atlantis narrative, written centuries later, may even echo this catastrophe. Today, satellite imagery hints at rectangular structures beneath the marshes of Doñana, potential ruins of their fabled capital. But until those waters part, the Tartessians remain Europe's greatest lost civilization, their golden artifacts whispering of a culture that bridged continents, only to vanish into the same estuaries that once made them rich. What ties these lost civilizations together isn't just the mystery of their disappearance, it's the unsettling pattern of how even the most advanced societies can crumble. Whether it's the Indus Valley's silent streets, the Moche's drowned temples, or the Garamantes' dried-up wells, their stories whisper the same warning. No amount of ingenuity makes a culture invincible. The common threads are haunting environmental shifts ignored until it's too late, over-reliance on single resources, and social divisions that deepen as crises mount. The Nabateans mastered desert hydraulics, yet their reservoirs ran dry. The Khmer engineered a watery paradise only to choke on their own deforestation. These weren't primitive cultures fumbling in the dark. They were innovators who pushed boundaries, only to discover that progress alone can't outrun vulnerability. Perhaps the most humbling lesson lies in how quickly memory fades. The Kushites ruled Egypt as pharaohs, yet their pyramids were forgotten. the Tarona's gold-laced cities vanished into myth until a farmer's shovel stumbled upon them. Civilizations that once shook the world can dissolve into footnotes, their languages and rituals erased not by time alone, but by the indifference of what comes after. Even the Tang dynasty's meticulous historians barely noted the Tarim mummy's Caucasian features, leaving modern archaeologists to piece together a lost branch of humanity. But these aren't just tales of doom, they're mirrors. When we see the Rapa Nui's toppled moai or Cahokia's abandoned mounds, we're forced to ask, which of our own systems might future archaeologists puzzle over? The parallels are impossible to ignore: climate stress, resource inequality, and brittle supply chains. The difference is we're living the warning signs they left behind. So which of these mysteries lingers in your mind? The industrial scale collapse of the Bronze Age empires, or the quiet evaporation of the North Chico? Maybe it's the Sanxingdui's shattered masks, begging us to imagine the rituals we'll never witness. Share your thoughts below, and if there's a vanished culture we didn't cover, let us know. After all, history's greatest lesson might be this: every civilization believes it's the exception until suddenly it's not.